Hey, everybody, and welcome to an emergency edition of, I don't know what podcast we're going to put this under, but an emergency edition of a podcast from the Automox Podcast Network. Yeah. Um, Rare circumstance. I don't know how many emergency updates we had. We are 2 days removed from, I think, a 200 plus CVE patch Tuesday. It has been a crazy week for IT administrators. And today, Jason and I are going to be giving you a high level overview of the latest from CISA, which is the Binding Operational Directive, or BOD 26-04. That essentially is throwing out some of the old severity-based patching models that they had mandated for federal agencies and replacing it with a new model that has some truly insane remediation guidelines that we're going to walk through today. So my esteemed guest here today, Jason, he's got his CIA shirt on, so he's
They sell them in the gift shop.
Great tip. I'm gonna have to get one of those the next time I come out. Jason's going to help us to kind of unload everything here. We're definitely not going to go through the full 16-row decision tree from CISA, but we will cover that elsewhere, like in the blog. So definitely go and check out the Automox blog as well. And let's go ahead and jump right in. So super quickly, how did we get to this point? Previously, there was a lot of guidance from CISA for these agencies around CVSS severity score and severity-based patching and SLAs related to those. But we're entering kind of a new world now that is more, I would say, exploit evidence driven as a model. So Jason, I don't know if you want to cover really quickly just the 4 signals that CISA is now kind of specifying as how do we determine the urgency here around a patch.
Yeah, and I think the context for everyone to understand is, even though these binding operational directives from CISA don't, bind any private entities, they don't even bind the entirety of the U.S. government, right? They don't bind specifically DoD. It is for federal civilian agencies. These are generally considered best practices, and they're the sort of things that are going to flow down into a whole host of other things. So they're important to take into consideration and understand, because these are usually developed in conjunction with large industry government partners who have a lot of visibility that the rest of us do not. So the 4 signals that CISA wants you to focus on or wants focus upon to decide urgency. First is the asset publicly exposed. All right. That makes a lot of sense. If you don't have to do any work to get path to target, that's obviously top of the list. The second is whether or not the vulnerability is on the KEV, right? The known exploited vulnerability. There's a whole catalog of it. And so if it's on KEV and it's known to be exploited, obviously that's of greater concern. The third one is whether or not an attacker can automate the exploit, right? Is this something that requires manual intervention? Is it something where, you can kind of script it out and do mass exploitation at scale? And I expect that category in particular to get more sophisticated as time goes on, because, there are degrees of exploitation, right? Great example. Back in, I think it was like 2021, when the Microsoft Exchange bug was running wild and free, and the Chinese were doing global mass exploitation of it. When I was at Cyber Command, we saw a lot of the activity where they were firing on endpoints multiple times because some nuances in the exploit, unless you had them perfectly figured out, and they didn't, meant that you had to sometimes go several times in a row in order to hit the right wicket through the load balancer, to hit the right point in memory in order to be able to exploit it. So I expect some of that to filter in over time as well, where that category will increase in sophistication as far as, is this a one shot and done, or is this a multiple try? Does your system need to be in a particular state? I expect qualifications there. And then finally, how much control does exploitation grant? And this is where I also expect more sophistication to come in the future, because, one of the hallmarks of, these mythos class frontier models, or even near mythos, is their ability to chain exploits together. And so that's another one where, like, yeah, this particular exploit might only get you the ability to write a file, but when you chain it together with these other threes that are much lower severity, like that ends up being the holy grail for an attacker of remote code execution.
Yeah, and you've got to think that the language here leaves the door open to allow them enough flexibility with some of the new AI models and fears around the sophistication of those models and helping attackers to automate exploits. But then, as you mentioned, also chain stuff together to make
Yeah.
maybe an exploit that feels harmless in a vacuum become a lot more dangerous when chained. So uh, that's really interesting. I think to me, when I saw this and when I first started reading it, what stuck out and was the most surprising was the actual tiers of response time.
Right.
Talk a little
And
bit about that
oh,
and what your take is.
yeah, it's I think there's actually two things going on here, right? One is clearly the impetus, the primary impetus is, frontier pace models and their ability to outpace current software development techniques, or still emerging software development techniques, in their ability to develop and deploy and then get customers to place a patch. Um, I think the other one is I bet there's a lot of recognition, because I know, with the generation of CISA folks I worked with, there was a lot of recognition that the timelines they had at the time were too slow. And I think that's part of why we're seeing such aggressiveness here as well, is like, never let a good crisis go to waste, of like, let's actually talk turkey and get these timelines down to the level of aggression that they should have been at years ago, right? Because mass exploitation has been around for a while. The ability of attackers to certain attackers to take a patch and reverse engineer it and roll out an exploit within hours or days, it's always been there. It's just now the scale and the barrier to entry is much lower. So the tiers we're seeing, they're something, all right. They're really aggressive, but I don't think this is, while they sound like they might be borderline ridiculous, I think you have to understand that this is coming from, you know, several years, many years of operational experience, and I think this is actually right about where it needs to be, despite the aggression. So, first one, highest risk, 3 days, 3 days, and that is fleet wide. That is no exceptions. Uh, Next one down is 14 days, then 60 days, and then formally defer to the next system upgrade, meaning what most of us would call a maintenance window. But that clock's dynamic, so if you pull a system off the internet, the clock relaxes. If the exploit suddenly pops up on the kev, clock tightens. So if an agency can't approve it, can't prove that an asset isn't exposed, CISA assumes it is and assigns the fastest clock. Same thing with, if there's not a patch, if you can't emplace the patch, your primary mitigation method is taking it offline, is isolating it, right? Like, they will take a loss of operational capacity and impact to, in this case, not customer services, but taxpayer services, over getting exploited, just because it's done so much damage across the federal government, costs so much money. The other thing that we need to unpack here is, I've seen a couple news outlets calling this a count the criteria model. It's not that, right? There's a 16-row decision tree, but the combinations in true federal government fashion, right? 16-row decision tree of, cross correlating criteria, but it while it's complex and not as neat as everyone would like it to be, it's really what matters, right? It's very realistic, and I think it's when you look at the combinations, it's that combinatorial accumulated risk that adds up, and this has been present in government circles for a long time, right? Marine Corps taught me operational risk management. We've talked about residual risk and accumulated risk and all these other things, and it's essentially an extension of that thinking, and it is frankly the sophistication that we need and that we've probably needed for years, but now the frontier models are forcing the issue.
Yeah, and I think the other interesting thing you mentioned that I'd like to zoom in on a little bit, and as great a content as it would be to have, the 16-point decision tree pulled up and you just walk me through it line by line over the course of the next hour. I think we'll avoid that for this version of the podcast, and we'll point people to the actual source, which is the operational directive itself. So the one thing that we talked about, I think, obviously, this is the only people that are truly bound are those federal civilian agencies. So how is this relevant for your run of the mill business operating in the United States or anywhere else? And I think you've mentioned frontier pace models. I think the concept that we've been trying to talk about and that you've been talking about a lot here at Automox is frontier pace governance, right? In the same notion of it's not wasting a good crisis on the government side with this initiative. I think that there's a lot of opportunity for IT and security folks to utilize this moment to try and spur some change that maybe they haven't been able to before.
Yeah, I think the good news for the rest of us is the government's doing a responsible thing, and B, this is now our prep time, right? Like, now we see where things are headed, and I think we should be realistic that this is going to filter down. It always does, right? This is going to filter down into federal contractors and then subcontractors. This is going to filter down through insurance and regulations. This is going to filter down to board level conversations that turn into executive decisions. And this is the future that we need to prepare for, right? Like, the concept of, what we are finally seeing is the decades old concept of give me a rationale to patch turning into you need to justify why you can't patch, right? You need to apply the patch and take the IT risk and take the risk of an impact to services or performance or availability, because for too long confidentiality and integrity have they've been wandering a mile behind the king of availability, right? Availability's always been king. And I think that this is that paradigm shift that's been long overdue, simply because the cost and risk has gotten too high on the other side of the equation. So, this is just in the way that, Kev was a thing only in government circles when it started. I remember having I remember before, talking about, for me, it's been a long time, right? I remember Kev before it was Kev. I remember when they were searching for a name for it and when it was getting proposed, and we were having discussions with our CISA colleagues about it before there was any public rollout. And so at the time, if I had gone to any of my friends in industry and mentioned Kev, they wouldn't have known what I'm talking about, right? Whereas now I have discussions with colleagues in industry and everyone knows what Kev is. They're fully versed in it. Like, it is just part of our world. It's part of our ecosystem. And I think this is going to be the same way, because if you look at Verizon every year puts out the DBIR, their data breach incident report, and 2026 was no exception to this being sort of an excellent and foundational report that the entire industry looks at. Exploitation is now the top initial access vector, right? It has finally beat out phishing, social engineering, like all the other tricks and techniques. It's straight up exploitation. And you put that against the backdrop that CAV remediation rates are falling. Right? It's median resolution is 43 days. So it's been getting, and I mean falling in a good way, but that's the ability to meet those has gotten better. We're down to 43 days, but now the new floor ceiling, I don't know. I don't know if we're upside down or right side up, but you got to get from 43 days to 3 days. That is highly aggressive, right? And so that means there's got to be a lot of business type decisions about what stays online and what are we willing to sacrifice. And isolation. You ever tried isolating something that's designed to maximize uptime in 3 days? Like, that's not always an easy lift, right, Peter? Like, you think about like load balancers, redundant sites, backups and failovers, and there's a lot of things. Everything that's put on the internet is designed for resiliency. It has to be. Like, that's the design of the internet. It's that age old joke of, as soon as you put something online or bring it into to production, it starts breaking, right? The internet is in a constant state of breaking, but that's why the first design principle of the internet is to maximize availability and resiliency. That was the design back when it was DARPANET, and that's where we are to today, where it's both it's shockingly easy to take something offline that you didn't mean to, but it's also surprisingly hard to take something offline when you really mean to take it offline. And now we're going to have to deal with several struggles simultaneously as an industry.
Yeah, I completely agree. And talking a little bit about the remediation rates, just the number of vulnerabilities as well. There's I'm seeing a lot of debate on the internet about how useful Mythos is, how effective it is. And I personally think it's kind of irrelevant. The one thing that's been true over the last couple of years is the models keep getting better, regardless of, the marketing hype when any given model is released. They keep getting better. I remember when ChatGPT first came out early in my Automox career, I went on and I tried a few things. I was like, this is crap. It doesn't know anything from the last 5 years that happened. Like, how am I going to use this in my day-to-day job? And now we all find ourselves, on these tools pretty much constantly. So I think, whether or not you think Mythos is like the turning point for, easy exploitation and vuln discovery, I don't know how much that actually matters right now, because there's going to be another model that will be better. And then there will be another model after that will also be better. And the other thing that we're seeing is every software vendor in the space is using these models and these tools to build their own products. So they're not only getting faster, but they're also, I think, we could probably fairly safely say they're getting a little bit sloppier, right? Like Apple had to pull back a Claude MD file from one of their updates. And I saw yesterday Netflix accidentally left the Claude MD file in one of their app updates. So like, the evidence is there. And I personally believe, I don't know if you agree with me, but my tin hat theory is like the new norm for Patch Tuesday is probably going to be like 180 to 200 CVEs, like clockwork, and that'll be the new floor. Whereas before it was, maybe 100. So there's multiple fronts for people to deal with.
I wonder how much viability Patch Tuesday has left in it as a monthly thing, right? I'm I'm old enough. I remember when Patch Tuesday came around, and it wasn't Microsoft driven, it was customer driven, right? It was customers saying, hey, you're releasing these patches all the time, and there's no rhyme or reason or cadence to it. And like, every time you release it, like, that's something that I have to action, and it's not predictable at all. Can you please bring some order to the chaos? And that was how Patch Tuesday came about, of like, okay, there's enough patches to make this a monthly event, but we will consolidate into this monthly event so that IT teams aren't running all over the place and trying to figure out what's, did anything release today? What released today? What's the impact of it? It was one predictable sort of rhythmic event month over month, year over year that you could rely upon. And many vendors, you know, built their own policies around either aligning to Patch Tuesday or some Patch Tuesday offset just to give that predictability. Well, you know, when you got a 3-day clock, like, is like on Microsoft side, if they know that that's out there, and especially if there's exploitation involved, like they can't wait until the following month. They're not going to. They're going to release out of cycle patches, and as that grows and grows, like at some point we reach the tip over where we will very likely get more out of cycle than we get in cycle, and at that point the cycle begins to break down. And so, like, does it just go away and we're back to the olden days, or do we go to like a weekly rhythm? Like, what becomes the new norm? And I kind of think we're at the point where patching has gotten mature enough, and software testing is improving, not just through AI, but even like standard automation and modern test suites. I kind of wonder if we're within the sort of 1 to 2 year envelope of seeing where, hey, patches are just released around the clock as they're done and ready to go, and patches are implemented on the customer side, so around the clock almost as they're ready to go, and that just becomes the new normal. And then where we really start putting our focus is not so much on should we patch it or not. It's speed, go, 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 and our focus becomes more on resiliency for if a patch goes awry, rather than
Yeah.
Should I do this or shouldn't I?
Yeah, it's a great perspective because I think reading between the lines and some of the stats we've seen, Patch Tuesday quantities, just, I mean, honing in on Microsoft only, right? But like there's other examples. And, reading between the lines, we got more vulnerabilities, easier to exploit vulnerabilities, more patches to apply. If you don't have some comfort in automation, it's going to be very difficult, which is probably being generous for you to keep up here, if you're responsible for that. So I think we've talked a lot about the directive, and we're coming up on time here. So I do want to talk just a little bit about, like, if you're listening to this and you're not sure what to do, just two pieces of advice. I think the first one would be, do you know your remediation SLA for actively exploited vulnerabilities? I think looking at the CISA directive, that's probably one of the more important categories, is those actively exploited vulns, to start with. Do you know your SLA? And not just do you know it, but can you actually prove what you're aligning, like what your metric is relative to that SLA? Can you prove it to the rest of the business? That would be the first piece. And the second piece is, if you have an auditor or a cyber insurance provider, what's their reaction to this? Are they going to keep clamping down on what you have to hit in order to get, somewhat reasonably priced cyber insurance or pass an audit? What are your thoughts there, Jason?
I completely agree, and I think just to put a slightly finer point on it is the SLAs are not going to get any shorter, right? There is no universe of reality where those numbers go up. They only go down from here on out. And, I think we're going to see increased accountability around them, right? So what you really need to ask yourself is, step one is, can you measure it? Step two is, can you meet it? And step three is, can you decrease it? Right. And that's the new rhythm that we all need to be focused upon is, am I measuring it accurately? Am I meeting what I say? Do I do what I say I do? Does my solution do what it says it does? Does my, team and my process, does it achieve the outcome that we say it should, and then and if no, okay, let's get to it, and then okay, now how do you beat it? How do you get a little bit faster and a little bit faster? And I think like that's even you can see the writing on the wall in the CISA thing where you know that 3 days, right? Like that's not everything. That is kind of a worst case scenario. And it's nice to see him bring up deferral as an option and other things because I think that's still realistic for a great many patches. But expect while the 60 bucket and the deferral bucket, deferred to next maintenance window bucket, will be the biggest part of the curve. I expect that curve to kind of shift forward, and I don't think any of us knows how quickly, right? Like, how quickly do we shift from maintenance window and 60 days into 14 days and 3 days? That's the part that's really uncertain, and you got to start being able to make progress and drive your numbers downwards before you can really assess how far off you are, right? Like what would it take to get us to a posture where the majority of things are serviced in either 3 days or 14 days? Like that is a big lift, but you have some time now where you're this is the time to prepare, this is the time to get budget, this is the time to get focus and build those procedures and reform those procedures to be able to meet this new reality.
Yeah, I think that's an excellent place to leave it on the takeaway of don't be paralyzed by fear. Try and leverage this to your advantage. If you're in IT or security, it's a great opportunity to try and secure some additional budget and hopefully improve your operating procedure, your life, maybe with some more automation around things that you were doing manually before. This is your opportunity to go out there and seize it. Thank you all for listening today. Thanks, Jason, for joining us. You can expect a lot more updates on this front from us. Keep an eye on the blog. We got something coming shortly to you as well.